Hi, everyone. We're going to wait a minute or two for the rest of the folks to trickle in, and then we'll continue. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being part of our community. My name is Valan Kolika, and I will be your host for today. A few reminders before starting. If you have issues viewing the stream at any time during the presentation and are using the web browser version of Teams, please refresh your browser. If you're using the desktop app of Teams, please exit and rejoin. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared publicly. We will post the recordings on our community at aka.ms/security-webinars. During this time, please feel free to ask questions at any time by typing them in the live event Q&A window by clicking on the Ask a Question button. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your questions anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter it. Now, we often get many questions on these webinars, and we will do our best to respond to all of them in real time. In the event, if the answer was not provided, or if you have additional questions post this event, please don't hesitate to raise them on our Azure Sentinel forum at aka.ms/Azure Sentinel community. If you're listening to this after the fact as a recording, that's also a great place to ask a question. We love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars, and you can do so at aka.ms/security-webinar-feedback. And while you're there, please join our community by visiting aka.ms/security-community. That's the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements. On our community, you can speak directly to our engineering teams that create our security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs and get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews, which you can sign up for at aka.ms/security private preview. And while you're there, you can request features. You can give feedback, review our product roadmaps, attend in-person events, or join webinars like this. We believe that the best way to improve our products is by removing any barriers between you and the people that create them. So we hope you'll join us. In today's session, Ofer and Pete are back and will take us through an overview of multi-tenant functional support as well as the investigation side of it using Azure Sentinel. Ofer Shazaf is a principal program manager, whereas Pete Ryan is our senior software engineer, both from our Sentinel engineering team. And without further ado, I will turn it over to them. Ofer, Pete, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Valon. You may know me. My name is Ofer Shazaf, and I'm a product manager with the Azure Sentinel Pro Group. But today, the main star will be Pete. Pete is a member of our research team, the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, so the security expert. And the main course today would be about multi-tenant investigation and hunting. So how do you best utilize our capability to work across tenants and workspaces in order to perfect your investigation and hunting capabilities? I will start providing preamble, and we'll walk you through shortly as to why would you in the first place have a multi-workspace and multi-tenant Sentinel implementation, as well as just in highlights a few tips and tricks as to how to manage those. So I'll start, hopefully not more than 10 minutes. I keep it on the clock, so I can provide the floor to Pete for the main attraction of the day. So, and I start really with basics. We talk about multi-tenant and multi-workspace, so we have to understand what those are. Tenant is something that, or the Microsoft AAD tenant is something that's very clear to you if you're a Microsoft Azure user. But if you come from other technologies, mostly from traditional SIEM, it might mean something different to you. In our world, tenant is an identity domain, essentially an Azure Active Directory domain, and it's used for identity management. Usually a tenant belongs to an organization. An organization would have one tenant, one main tenant, and possibly other ones for specific uses. A large organization with subsidiaries may have multiple tenants. A tenant is made of or includes subscriptions. Subscriptions are actually the services that provide you with computing capabilities. A subscription may be an Azure subscription, which include Azure services. It might be a software subscription, most notably Office 365 is a subscription. All of them within a tenant, within a identity domain. Drilling down and focusing on an Azure subscription is the unit, the basic unit within an Azure implementation. Azure is a public cloud infrastructure, and essentially a subscription is something that somebody pays for. An organization may have a lot of subscriptions because they belong to different groups within the organization and for different other reasons. Subscriptions, as well as resource groups, are containers for resources. Resources are your actual compute elements within a cloud infrastructure. Typically, a resource can be a virtual machine, which would be typical computing. But since the cloud or public cloud Azure is a very versatile environment where a lot is done without actually running your own VM, but rather using services, as often called PaaS services provided by Microsoft. Those resources may be things like a SQL service, a networking service, a firewall as a service, and Sentinel. Sentinel would be a resource within an Azure subscription. So what is this resource? What is this workspace, Sentinel workspace, which lives within a subscription? So the Azure Sentinel workspace is sort of, think of it as your database, your instance of Sentinel, which includes the event database, the rules, the incidents. Not everything is in the workspace, since Sentinel is tightly embedded in the Azure environment and uses elements which are not which are shared with other Azure elements. Some important Sentinel artifacts are not part of the workspace. Good examples are playbooks and workbooks, but the core, the database, the rules are part of this workspace. So workspace as I mentioned, is a resource. This resource is part of your Azure subscription. And in a simple world, in a simpler environment, one such instance within your subscription, which is part of your Azure AD tenant, would be all you need in order to create your SIEM and start doing security. However, the world is more complex than that, and there are many reasons that may drive you to have multiple workspaces in your environment. IT is never as simple as you would like it to be. So here are a few drivers that will require you to have multiple workspaces or multiple instances of Sentinel that you need to work with. The first three sort of are touchdown reasons. If you have them, you need multiple workspaces. If you have sovereignty or regulatory compliance requirements, you need to keep US data in the US and European data in the EU. You need to have multiple workspaces because workspaces are tied to a geography. If there's data ownership, you need each workspace to be owned by a different legal entity. You need multiple workspaces. Another important reason is that a workspace, as I mentioned, is within a tenant. If you have multiple Azure tenants in your organization, because it's a complex organization, and other use cases that you may be a service provider providing service to multiple organizations, you'll have multiple tenants and you'll need multiple workspaces. So the first three are a resounding yes. If you have them, you need multiple workspaces or multiple instances of Sentinel. The other four in this list are reasons that may suggest you need more than one workspace, but there are solutions for that, which I will not discuss in details today, but just in highlight. You may want granular data access control over the data, and naturally different workspaces are an easy solution for that. You have workspace A, and you give a group of people access to it, and workspace B, and give another group of users access to it. You may want to have granular retention settings. You may want so that some parts of the data are kept just for 3 months and other parts of the data are kept for longer period. You may want to do split billing, and it's very easy to say group A pays for workspace A and group B pays for workspace B. All those reasons have created the need for multiple workspaces in the past. For most of them, there are alternative solutions today that will enable you to use a single workspace. That said, you may already have multiple workspaces, or that you'll find that the solution we suggest here on the right are not suitable for your specific need. And sometimes there are just many workspaces because of historical reasons. That's the way that the system was architected. So you have multiple workspaces potentially across the tenants. The question is it good or is it bad? So it's a reality. You'll have more than one, and sometimes you need to have more than one because you have to keep the data in different geographies, for example. Is it good or is it bad? So as I mentioned, it offers many advantages in many different circumstances. For example, it means that the data is close to the source. It's where the customer expects it to be. It in the right geography for regulatory reasons. It can minimize network latency if the data is close to where it's collected. However, if you have multiple workspaces, okay, if you have multiple instances of Sentinel, multiple Sentinels, there are certain areas that you would want to handle. The first one is that you want to centrally monitoring those. So you want to make sure that an analyst does not have to go into multiple instances. It's a single view and thinks of all those instances as a single system. Now you will also want to make sure that you manage and deploy the system centrally, that you don't have to go and fix rules in each one of those. You want to see them as a single system. How do you do that? So I will not go into deep details on that. In the next slide, you see a link to a webinar that addressed exactly this topic, but in a high level, just that you'll be aware, okay? there are three important elements that you need to keep, number 2 to 4 in this plan, when you have multiple workspaces and work across them. The first one is that for the analyst, we offer a set of capabilities that will enable him or her to work across those workspaces from a central location and view them essentially as one. And Pete will focus mostly on that area. He'll talk about investigation and hunting in a multi-workspace environment. The element that we'll not discuss today is that you want also the SOC engineer, not just the analyst, to manage and deploy content to those workspaces automatically from a central point. Unlike central monitoring that we have the interface for central management, we don't have a UX interface. We rely on automation to enable you to manage and configure multiple workspaces from a central place. Lastly, I sort of mix the terms cross workspace if you have multiple workspaces but they're still in the same tenant, for example, because they're in 2 different data centers for compliance reasons, and multi-tenancy, where those workspaces are across different tenants, different Azure AD tenants. If your workspaces are across tenants, so both the features for working across them and for managing across them would work, but would require you to implement Azure Lighthouse. Azure Lighthouse is the Azure methodology or technology for enabling you to work across tenants. And those extend our built-in cross workspace capabilities to work across tenants. Now, that was a very brief introduction. To summarize in 2 words, Sentinel can live and breathe in a single workspace. That's a Sentinel implementation. There are many good reasons to distribute and have multiple workspaces, either in a single tenant or in multiple tenants that would serve requirements such as data ownership, sovereignty requirements, etc. As well as multi-tenancy, the fact that you have multi-tenant, more than one tenant in your organization. How do you implement? How do you work with this distributed Sentinel deployment? I described that in a higher level. If you go to the Ninja Training Module 3, you'll be able to get into more details as to how to do that. With this in mind, we'll focus now on how do you actually work with Sentinel and do investigation hunting. And I'll now have Pete. Pete, the floor is yours to present that.
Great, thanks, Ofer. So, as we, or as Ofer talked about, there are kind of numerous kind of reasons or architectures of why you would have multiple workspaces within an organization. Just make sure. There we go. These kind of range from architectural reasons to billing reasons to a bunch of other things. But from an analyst perspective, you probably fall into kind of one of the 3 scenarios. So you're either monitoring a single organization that has multiple workspaces or tenants. You are a multiple org enterprise, so a large enterprise with multiple separate subsidiaries, all of which are slightly different but fall under the same umbrella. Or you're an MSSP, where you're monitoring multiple separate enterprises from a single location, where each of the enterprises you're monitoring are entirely separate entities with a different context, a different operating model, and a different set of technology. And the way you're going to approach investigations in each of these scenarios is going to be subtly different, particularly between the single org scenario and the MSSP scenario, simply because your understanding of the data, your ability to directly interact with the other parts of the organization, and your kind of access to data is going to be slightly different. But again, the tools Sentinel has for these cross-workspace, cross-tenant investigations enable you to do this quite easily. So here's the kind of architecture we're going to use for the examples we're going to run through today. So we're going to be operating out of tenant 2, where we have 2 workspaces that are native to that tenant. And then we have a third workspace, workspace C, which belongs to another organization under a separate tenant, but we're using Azure Lighthouse to enable us to access that directly from tenant 2. And you'll see as we go through, the way Lighthouse works is effectively it makes a workspace from another tenant appear exactly the same way as a local workspace would. So the way we interact with workspace C isn't really going to be any different from the way we access workspace A or B, which makes things a lot simpler for us. So what are the kind of key tools we're working with? So KQL is the primary one. That's the core of Azure Sentinel's investigation hunting capabilities. And KQL has some good support for cross-workspace queries. We're also going to be using workbooks. Workbooks have the ability to visualize and process those cross-workspace KQL queries, so we can create some really nice kind of cross-workspace pieces. And again, as you work cross-workspace, and the more workspaces you have to monitor, and again, particularly if you're coming from the MSSP perspective, workbooks become more and more important because they give you the vital context you need to understand all the different workspaces you're working in, and understand what you're seeing in one workspace and how that applies to the other workspaces you've got under your kind of purview to monitor and investigate in. Hunting queries also are going to be pretty valuable to us, and in fact the entire hunting stack in Azure Sentinel is going to be pretty valuable to us from a cross-workspace investigation point of view. I'll touch on this a little bit more later, but in a cross-tenant, cross-workspace investigation, hunting is often much more valuable to you than using core detections. And we'll kind of go into that in a bit more detail why. And then we'll look at notebooks as well. So notebooks are one of the more advanced features of Azure Sentinel, but arguably the best solution for a full multi-tenant operation, and particularly on the MSSP side, because they give us a number of advantages around flexibility, collecting data, and also being able to process data in a way that prevents accidental data leakage and can help protect intellectual property as well. So the first place where we'll start is multi-workspace queries using KQL. So the easiest and simplest way to query multiple workspaces at once is using the union feature. So we can call in a workspace, we can call a table name. That's your kind of basic operator within any KQL query. By using union, what we can do is take 2 tables that we expect to be the same schema and easily join them together. So here we can say, take our table name and union it with another table. Now, by prefacing the other table name with workspace and the name of that workspace, we can call a second workspace's table together. So imagine if we were operating with alerts, we could take the security alert table from one workspace and union it with another from another workspace. And in this example, we're talking about 2 workspaces, but we can scale this up and have multiple workspaces all in one place, giving you the results from multiple workspaces, and if you're using Lighthouse, potentially multiple tenants, all within a single log analytics log output view. The other thing you're going to want to do with multi-workspace queries is make them a bit friendlier for analysts. The primary identifier across workspaces is going to be the tenant ID field, but no one likes remembering a nice long random GUID. So using extend, we can use conditional statements such as if to project out friendly customer names or org names or workspace names into those tables to make things a lot easier to understand and kind of manage as an analyst. But multi-workspace queries kind of come with their own challenges. The biggest one of these is size. You don't want to query that returns tens of thousands of results because it's not really practical to work through. And whilst that can be a challenge in a single workspace, as soon as you start joining multiple workspaces into that query, you've got to be a lot more conscious about exactly what you're bringing back. So a large query where you're just saying, get me all the data for, say, the last 2 days, you might be able to get away with it with a single workspace. You're probably not going to be able to do that with multiple workspaces. So you need to think ahead of time a lot more about what you're bringing back, how you're going to filter it, what you actually want to display. Thresholds are another area of thought and interest. Thresholds that you've set that work in a single tenant, and you've maybe set for your detection logic, they're not going to scale linearly for multi-workspace. So you can't just double it because you've got 2 workspaces. You're going to need to play around with thresholds a lot more and try and tweak and tune them to work in a multi-tenant, multi-org situation. And this is part of the reason why hunting can often be much better than detections in a multi-tenant environment, because you have more flexibility to tweak these thresholds. You've also got to think about context with this. Things like usernames, things like host naming conventions, they might be slightly different for each org. So again, if your KQL query includes parsing of particular string fields or extraction of certain elements, you've got to bear in mind that that might not be the same across workspaces. So you'll need to kind of rethink this. And finally, you might find that you're actually wanting to join data tables from different tenants, but actually with different schemas. Say, for example, you're looking for a brute force attack across multiple tenants. In one tenant, you might want to look at SSH. In another, you might want to look at RDP. You're going to need to take into account the fact that those 2 log types are going to appear in different tables and going to have different schemas. In which case, the union example I've used above probably isn't going to be the most efficient one for you. Instead, you're going to want to look at using join or perhaps a let statement in order to allow you to join across those schemas. But again, a lot of this will come down to what data you have and understanding the situation you're in. But most things that you will want to do in terms of combining data across tenants, you can do in KQL, which is very nice for us. So if I just jump across and we'll go kind of look at some of this in action. So here we're operating. This is one of the workspaces in tenant 2. And what we're going to do is look for some SSH brute force activity. So here we have our query to look for a single brute force attempt or brute force attempt within a single workspace. And you can see if we run this, ran it earlier for us, but we get no results. So we haven't found anything. But we know we have access to multiple workspaces. We've got those, excuse me, two workspaces in the tenant, and then the third workspace we have access to via Lighthouse. So what we can do is we can do our union to bring in a second workspace. So our second workspace within the tenant. We can call this, and again, we'll just pull back all the data for the last 24 hours, and you'll see straight away we've run into that issue of size. We've just got the first 10,000 results, but we have successfully got them from 2 workspaces in one, so that's good. But we probably want to do a bit more tweaking on this. And again, as you can see, I have trouble typing and speaking at the same time, so I don't want to have to type out this entire line every time. This is where functions come in handy. So I've already kind of set one up, but what we can do is write ourselves a function that does all this work for us and does some customer name mapping for us. So we map the tenant IDs to some friendly names. We're saying customer 1 and 2 in this space, but obviously it could be whatever you like. And now I can just call that using the function alias. So if I just, I'll call it multi-syslog. Time. Yeah. I get the same results. Again, I've hit the size limit, which kind of shows you the challenge here. But if we scroll across, select one down, you'll see we've got customer name, which is a lot friendlier than the tenant ID. But other than that, it's kind of our nice kind of raw syslog. What we can also do now we've got this function is take our query and try and run it using the function of multiple workspaces as a starting point. So we'll take that same kind of brute force query from before, which I have here. But what we're going to do is we're just going to swap out syslog for multi-syslog in this case. And again, we get no results. There's kind of plenty of reasons for this, and part of this goes back to what I was saying about thresholding before. The thresholds that we've built for a single workspace detection are not necessarily just going to automatically translate across into the multi-workspace scenario. Again, you've got more systems, you've got more users, you've got a different context. And again, in this case, we found nothing, but you could quite easily have the other problem where by bringing in the multiple workspaces, we just start introducing a load of false positives. So whilst this function method just to join in other workspaces is really quick and easy and is probably kind of your first starting point, don't just try and replicate everything you've already got in terms of queries and run them with the additional workspaces, because it's not going to kind of work out. We need to kind of think through it a little bit more, tweak the thresholds, and see where we get. And that's exactly what we've done in one of these other ones. Let me pull it up. I thought I had it preloaded for us. So here we've taken the same query. We're still using our multi-syslog function, so calling syslog from those 2 workspaces, and we're projecting out a friendly customer name. But we've played with the thresholds a little bit more and tweaked it. And by running this, again, we get quite a nice, easy hunting output. Now, obviously, this is a little bit contrived because I built this demo, so I know what I'm looking for. But this is a perfectly usable query in the real world. Again, you probably need to tweak it for each environment. But what we can see here is we have a single IP that has attempted brute force using the same set of passwords and usernames, or usernames in this case that we can see, against 3 different hosts in 2 different tenants here. So again, you can see how that detection works across. And in this case, we didn't find any of the brute force attempts in the single tenant query we ran first of all, which would have been under the customer 2 tenant. And the reason for that was because in this instance, if we go look at the individual logs, we'll see that this password spray that the attacker did was specifically aimed at hitting large number of organizations and hosts, but very few attempts each time. So well below our thresholds when looking at a single tenant, but when combined across multiple tenants, started to hit that threshold of failed logon attempts from a single location. So here we've done exactly what we wanted to do, just using functions and just using KQL. So again, any analyst who's familiar with KQL and Sentinel already will be very easily and quickly able to kind of pick up this side of things. So switching back to here quick. The thing is, just running KQL queries isn't going to get you everything you need. You're going to want to use some of the other elements of Sentinel to kind of gain efficiencies. As I mentioned before, hunting is better than detections when it comes to a multi-workspace scenario. The size of data and the threshold issue means that creating reliable detections that have a kind of usable false positive rate across tenants is very difficult. That's obviously what we do at Microsoft day in, day out. We try and create these queries that will work across multiple customers, whether they're in Sentinel or Azure Security Center or Defender ATP. And it's not an easy task. We dedicate a lot of time to it. We have to do a lot of filtering and a lot of QA for these things. So if you want to gain the maximum efficiency for your work, I would say focusing on hunting over detections, particularly in your kind of initial stage of bringing in multiple workspaces, is a good way to focus. What you can also do, and what you'll need to do with the more workspaces you add, is focus more on building context. Again, understanding the context of each workspace, the data in it, is going to give you much greater efficiencies when A, trying to tune the thresholds that we talked about, and B, when you find results and understand what's going on. Workbooks are great for helping you build context, whether they be an individual workspace level or a multi-workspace level. And really, you would want to have a kind of combination of those within your environment. So your analysts, when they see something, can easily pivot to a workbook and understand what they're looking at. Again, if you're in a multi-workspace enterprise where you've got, say, several distributed organizations all working under the same umbrella, it's probably a good idea to outsource some of the context building. So don't rely on your security analyst to do it. Look at if there's a way that you can bring in other parts of the org to help kind of build that context piece for you. You can also play workspaces off against each other for hunting. So whilst you can build baselines against one set of data within Sentinel, with multiple workspaces, you have the ability to use other workspaces and other tenants as your baseline. So looking at deviations in patterns away from, yes, the one workspace's average, but also other workspaces. And then again, when you look at big security incidents or big vulnerability disclosures that affect multiple orgs around the world, so like things like when Heartbleed got announced, when WannaCry happened, some orgs got hit earlier than others. And by kind of monitoring cross workspace like that, you can often get early warning of something spreading throughout multiple workspaces, and allow you to better prepare other workspaces for things that are happening. And again, you want to leverage the threat intelligence capabilities of Sentinel to allow you to share capabilities, knowledge, and intelligence across your workspaces. This can sometimes be a little bit tricky when you're working particularly in the MSSP space, because you might not be allowed to, based on customer confidentiality, share threat intelligence indicators across those workspaces. And we'll touch a little bit on that later when we talk about notebooks and how we can work around that. But again, if you can, I would make sure you're using Sentinel's threat intelligence capabilities to allow you to share threat intelligence indicators across workspace. And again, that union feature where you're linking multiple workspaces can be particularly valuable when talking about threat intelligence, because you have the ability to keep all your threat intelligence in a single centralized workspace for easier kind of management and coordination, but then call it and correlate with it when querying data from other workspaces as well. So we switch back and I'll show you kind of some of the value you can get, particularly from workbooks. So workbooks are really valuable for gaining context. And again, I would encourage anyone, whether you're multi-tenant or multi-workspace or not, to focus on having these types of workbooks for your org. So this is just showing us a breakdown of sign-ins over the kind of like the last week for our org. We can look at patterns of life, we can look at locations, we can look at things like user agents. And for an analyst, getting context, obviously this is really useful. When I see a login from the United States at midnight on a Tuesday, I want to know, is that what I expect? Is that not what I expect? And you can reasonably expect analysts to be able to kind of build that knowledge themselves during one workspace monitoring. But once you've got more than a few workspaces, you're going to need tools like this to allow them to be able to do this visually and rely on the data rather than having to just hold knowledge in their head or a wiki or somewhere else. And again, you don't have to rely on having one of these for each tenant. You can start building these for multi-tenants. Again, workbooks are powered by KQL queries, so we can use that same KQL union feature to project multiple workspace data in a single workbook. So here we split it down, so we've got 2 tenants, and we can see actually one of our tenants has a lot higher volume of data related to sign-ins across the day than the other one. We can see one has a much higher log-on failure rate than the other one. And again, all of this is really, really valuable to an analyst to be able to kind of understand what they're looking at and what they're seeing. The final one that I kind of have for you is looking at network activity and what I was talking about, the baselining piece. So here we just have network volume for 3 different tenants based off, this is just using the common security log. We've got some firewall data in there. We're looking at total volume going through over a 2-week period. And you can see we have this spike here. We can see that the spike only applies to 2 of our tenants. This green one here didn't see that same spike. And actually that spike affected one tenant slightly earlier than the other one. So this is all kind of valuable baselining activity to go look at and go investigate and understand what was going on, and particularly why maybe 2 of our workspaces were affected and 1 wasn't. Obviously there could be a whole bunch of reasons for that, but this gives a really easy way for an analyst to get an idea about what's happening and what might be worth investigating. The other piece we have is our hunting queries. So again, what we can do is, I think we've got one right at the end. Yes, we have the ability to run that same multi-workspace query we had before looking for brute force and save it as a hunting query. So we're calling that multi-syslog function, but this time we have it saved as a hunting query that we can run whenever we like and have persistence with. So whilst you can't have multi-tenant based detections, you can have multi-tenant based hunting queries. Now again, you need to pick a workspace to put these in, to store these in. So it's kind of worth prioritizing one workspace where you can have this content. But you can see you can leverage a lot of the capabilities in Sentinel to use and benefit from the multi-workspace access. So finally, we have notebooks. So I'm probably a bit biased on the notebooks front. I think they're great, but that's because I spend a lot of my time building them. But they have a whole bunch of advantages when we're talking about multi-tenant pieces. Firstly, they allow you to do cross-tenant investigations without having to use Lighthouse. So as we'll see in a second, we can bring data from multiple sources together in a single notebook, whether we have Lighthouse access to those, or whether we have to authenticate separately, or whether we get the data via a completely different method. Doesn't really matter. Also, because notebooks operate outside of the main Sentinel container, it's a great way of hiding or masking particular IP from customers as an MSSP, or also preventing cross-tenant data leakage. So if you're running multi-workspace queries, particularly if you're trying to pivot on a certain indicator, an IP address, that will be visible via the kind of KQL history, or if you say there's a hunting query to anyone with access to that, which might not always be ideal. With a notebook, we don't really have that worry. What we can do is keep it all within the notebook's context, which you can then kind of control access to separately. Therefore, still allowing other users, customers, other orgs to access their raw Sentinel data, but not necessarily see that what you're doing in the back end in the notebooks for that detection piece. So I've got a very brief example of a cross workspace notebook. So I'm running this locally just for ease today. But what we're doing is, again, we're taking that same query we were having before, but this time we're running it against a single workspace. We're just taking the syslog table. And what we're doing this time instead is running that query twice to give us two sets of results. One is using a query provider connected to our first workspace, and the second one connected to our second workspace. And then what we can do is just join them together. So we haven't had to rely on any special access. This access could be provisioned separately. But we can query both of them, and because they're the same table and the same format, we can easily concat them. If we were using other data tables, so again, going back to that example of SSH and RDP, we could use merge or join to combine this data. We can then do some things in notebooks that we can easily do in KQL, or maybe we don't want to do there because we want to keep it out. So we can do things like grouping by here, tenant ID and success. So again, we can see that in one tenant, we had one successful logon event and 225 failures. Slightly less in the other one, but still kind of a similar pattern. We can also kind of build some of the visualizations that we have in workbooks or in KQL, but again, we can potentially customize them a bit more in notebooks. So here we're looking at the same data, firstly split out by tenant. So we've got tenant 1 and tenant 2, and here by logon result. And again, we can start to see things that obviously stand out. So our successful logons across the different tenants all came very close together, and they're grouped by a whole bunch of failed logons below. So this is kind of a really easy visual way to see this is our password spray attempt that we detected earlier. We can also chart stuff out. Again, we could do all this in workbooks as well. But the really interesting thing is kind of when we get later down. So what we've done so far in this notebook is just kind of replicate what we had done in KQL and workbooks inside Sentinel. But let's say we have access to another customer tenant, but we don't have them access to our Lighthouse, or we're not allowed to bring their data into the Sentinel in the first place. Maybe it's you're working with a classified system and it has to remain on-prem. Well, what we can do is we can bring that data into this notebook as well, This time we're just loading it from an exported CSV file, combining it with our Sentinel live data, and again we can query across it. So we can take that indicator before that we had from another customer, and we can check and see if we've got any results matching that in our third data set. And because I've done this all in a notebook that I'm running locally, there's no chance that that IP address here will bleed into other systems. If it's a sensitive internal username, say, that we wanted to try and pivot on, we'd have no worry about another customer seeing that or an unauthorized user seeing that. So we can do stuff in the notebook that we more safely or kind of more privately than we would want to necessarily in Sentinel. Now, again, you could probably set a lot of this control up in Sentinel yourself, but you might not want to do it for every situation. So notebooks kind of give you that flexibility. And again, if you're an MSSP and developed a more complex detection logic, maybe an ML model for detecting particular things that you didn't want to necessarily expose to your customers, the working of, you could run that within a notebook context, bring in data from your various customers into the notebook, run it, output the results, and then just write the results back out into the Sentinel workspaces. So you give your customers the value of the output without them having to be able to see the working of the logic behind your intellectual property. So that's a kind of very quick overview of what is a very complex subject. So Ofer covered a lot about the technical implementation of what you can do, as well as your architectural considerations. And again, if you are just starting out on your Sentinel journey, really think hard about your workspaces and how you're going to architect it, because it does have a big impact. And again, if you're an analyst and you're tasked with investigating multiple workspaces, make sure you learn the full range of what KQL can do. Go through the KQL syntax and check, because there's a lot of functionality in there that will help you. And remember, if you're ever typing KQL syntax more than a few times, a function is probably the way to go to help you out there. And then just because you're working multiple workspaces, it doesn't mean that you can't leverage all those other great features in Sentinel. Workbooks are particularly great for this. So again, look at building up multiple tenant, multiple workspace workbooks, because it will really help give you that context and background you need when you're looking at specific data sets. And that's all from me today. Obviously, any questions you've got, we'll go through, and any feedback you have in the future, particularly about what we can do to make a multi-workspace, multi-tenant analyst life easier, would be greatly appreciated. As Alon said at the top of this, we really value that direct customer engagement and customer feedback.
Thank you, Pete. Yes, there were definitely some questions, but most of them they were answered from the team. There is, though, a great feedback from Dean. He's saying that on the idea would be to view secure score information from multiple tenants. He's saying that we have customers that have multiple tenants, and there is currently no way to easily see security information from each one. The admins have to log into each one separately. And I think Chris mentioned that this is currently in the works, but if you and Oprah has any comments on that will be great to share.
Maybe Chris can. It's an Azure Security Center feature.
Okay, Chris.
Not very relevant for Sentinel. It's important.
Putting you on the spotlight, Chris.
Yeah, so at the moment for Azure Security Center, the secure score being the foundation, the fundamental piece to understand both the security posture and also the security hygiene. Right now, we are going to be working on giving you the visibility across tenants, not just across subscriptions. At the moment, this piece of feedback is being considered. So what we will do is that, if anything, we will update you once we get a concrete answer from the engineering team. But it is being considered at the moment.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And just some reminders before ending the call. Our next scheduled Sentinel webinar is on July 9th. That is Workbooks Deep Dive, Visualize Your Security Threats, Enhance. Besides Sentinel, we will be hosting a handful of webinars during July and August months. That is on Microsoft Defender ATP and Microsoft Threat Protection. For details and registrations, please use the link I posted earlier. That is aka.ms/security webinars. This is also the link where we keep our recordings from our past webinars. And in case we missed to answer your question, or if you have additional questions post this webinar, you can visit us on our Azure Sentinel forum at aka.ms/Azure Sentinel community. Thank you, Pete and Ofer, for a great presentation. Thank you to the rest of the team who helped answering the questions. And most of all, I want to thank you for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. So we hope to see you next time. Goodbye.